So if you've been on any language learning website or forum or anything, then there's no doubt that you've seen this at least 5 or 6 times, that people go on there and people can't decide. They don't know what language they want to learn. So they go on here and they make a post and they ask, hey, I want to learn a language, but I don't know which one. Which one? Please, reddit.com, decide for me. Which language should I learn? And then people respond with Uzbek because, of course, that's the natural answer. You should learn the language of Uzbekistan. But if you don't want to learn Uzbek, then I think maybe I have an answer for you. Whether you're trying to choose between several, 3 or 4 languages that you can't decide between, or maybe you don't know at all which one you want to learn, or maybe you've already decided. I don't know. I still think this will be a good video for that because I think there are some elements to languages that people kind of don't look at before they decide they want to learn. And I know the generic answer to this question, which language should I learn, is still the language that you want to learn the most, the one you're most interested in. And that still holds true, of course. But if you're trying to decide, then I think this is there are a few things to look at, right? So I think the first thing to look at is there's this Foreign Service Institute chart that lists out the languages that lists them out, categorizes them by not really. I mean, it says difficulty, but this is more. It's time investment, right? So you have these languages that are closely related to English. It'll be a smaller time investment. Maybe not this low. I think their estimates are pretty low, but these will be the least time investment. Whereas you have these super difficult, they say in their words, languages that like Japanese, which Japanese, of course, is one of the most popular languages to learn. There's tons of people trying to learn this language, and I really don't think they do the research beforehand to see just how hard it is compared to other popular languages like French and Italian. It's really difficult, and I think they should. If the people who are trying to study Japanese, I think they should see it as more of a challenge or as something that is really a big time investment. It's just something it's going to be a big part of your life for a long time. And if you're okay with that, then you should continue. But I think that's something that makes learning Japanese a different monster than learning any of these other languages. So when you look at these languages, though, and then of course you have this bigger list of slightly less difficult than Japanese languages, and Russian's another popular one on there. But most of the popular languages, thankfully, are in this easier category. And so the next thing really, probably the most important thing to look at after looking at this and to keep in mind is the access you have to resources. And also what kind of resources, and by resources, I mean essentially books or anything you're going to watch, like a TV show. What kind of resources are going to make you excited to practice the language? Because if you're learning a very obscure language, or even something like Romanian, it's probably going to be fairly difficult to find things that you really want to read or really want to watch. And so I pulled up some examples. Of course, the first type of resource you're going to need are these kind of books, unless you want to use an app. I know these apps are really popular, but I'm not sure. That it's kind of controversial now how the effectiveness of these apps. I think it's pretty up in the air at the moment. So you might want to just go with one of these series of books where they have beginner books and then intermediate, and maybe they even have advanced. And the thing is, once you get through these and you learn, they lay it out for you, all the grammar and everything you need to know. that's not going to be enough. You're not going to be fluent at that point because you need to practice what you've learned and learn more vocabulary and everything. So the next thing you're going to need are novels, really. And this is where things get tricky because there's some... Oh, and also one thing I was going to mention, immersion is another thing that people talk about. And I think there's some misconception with that, especially when people say, "Oh, you just move to another country and then you'll just pick up the language like magic." And the reality is, it doesn't really work that way unless you're really super forced to practice it. But the practicing thing is what really, it's what makes you learn the language. So you can practice however you want to practice, but I think reading is a good way. And so if you're a picky reader like me, you're going to want to read books that you find interesting. And books that you find interesting might be very hard to find if you choose lesser known or lesser kind of less popular language, right? But this one, here we have Lord of the Rings in German. German is obviously a very popular language to learn, and it's just going to be you're going to find plenty of books or anything really translated into German. But that's not to say that if you choose something less popular, that you'll have nothing. Because I was surprised to see this. We have Norwegian here, this is the first book that just popped into my head to type in, and lo and behold, here it is, a Norwegian audiobook available here. So sometimes you will be able to find content, and if you're okay with kind of being limited a bit in what kind of content that you're going to have to consume, then this should be fine. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And also, if you are picking a more popular language, then you'll be able to find a lot of games that have been translated. I mean, this one even has full audio, which is pretty incredible. And then games like this is a JRPG, which I think is a really good option for practicing a language, because these JRPGs have tons of dialogue and tons of text. So you're going to be pretty forced to follow along in the language that you're learning. And this one, and the reason I'm on the Portuguese website is because the American website doesn't have this information. This one we have German, English, Spanish, French, Italian, Japanese, Korean, and Chinese. So as you can see, they're fairly popular languages, and that's kind of a theme that I think you'll come across as you look for resources. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. And it goes the reverse way as well. The more obscure the resource, the fewer languages it's going to be available in. So that is pretty important. Also, dialects, another thing to keep in mind. Definitely know about the dialects of the language you're learning. I mean, there are things that will surprise you. I think a lot of people don't know that German has a lot of dialects, and people don't know that Swiss German, for example, I mean, I think people probably fall into the trap of trying to learn standard German so they can go move to Switzerland. And they don't realize that the Swiss don't speak standard German, they speak Swiss German. And trying to find Swiss German content is going to be probably fairly difficult, because most of this stuff is going to be in standard German. And you have a similar situation with Portuguese, where although European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese are somewhat similar, they're still fairly different. And so when you look online for content, you're actually mostly going to find Brazilian Portuguese. So definitely know the dialects. Know what you're getting into with the dialects. Finally, the last thing to look into is the actual utility of the language you're learning. So this one might not be as important for you really if all you want to do is enjoy content in the language. But if you're looking to travel or live abroad, then you probably want to know how many people in that country already know English. And you can look here. This is a ranking of English proficiency. So if you were learning Dutch to go live in the Netherlands, well, good news, you really don't need to do that because they are number one on the English proficiency. And number two is Austria. So if you were learning German to go there, I mean, you could still do that. It's still fun, I think, to learn another language. But just know that not only is it not necessary for some of these countries, but it's also going to be difficult to practice with people in these countries because they might switch to English, especially if you're really struggling. So that's something to be aware of, especially, Scandinavian countries as well, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. And then Germany's number 11, which is still pretty high, still in this high ranking. So that's kind of one issue with trying to learn German is it's probably not going to save your life if you're living in Germany to know German. But if you want to, then you should. But just know that it's probably not going to be super critical versus something like Japanese, where even though it's obviously, as mentioned before, it's obviously very, very difficult language, but it's quite useful. And also, you'll be able to find plenty of content in Japanese. I mean, it's an ocean of content in Japanese. Even if you don't like anime or whatever, you can still find books and everything. So it's kind of strange. It's interesting how whatever language you pick, there's always some issue, right? It's either not useful, like German's not really super useful, or it's like Japanese where it's too difficult. There's always something, right? So the question is at this point, which language checks all the boxes? Which language is easier, has a lot of resources, and is useful? And my answer is Spanish. And you might say French as well. I think French is almost as useful as Spanish, but Spanish really checks all the boxes. I mean, if you look here, we have Spanish and French, of course, but we have Spanish as well here in this easy category. And I don't think I need to go into looking into resources for Spanish. There are plenty. I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding them. The two games we looked at here, both available in Spanish. And I didn't even look at this. I mean, this is the ranking of how many speakers there are of certain languages, and you can see Spanish has about double the amount of speakers. I mean, a little under double of French speakers. So I definitely think Spanish is the answer to this question: which language should I learn? Because it checks all those boxes, and yeah, I think you should learn Spanish. That's my answer.